Labor did not mention any of their renewables plan. Chris Bowen was in witness protection. They kept him separate because they know that when you wheel him out, when you bring this stuff into the public domain, it falls apart.
That there is no other alternative. And if you look at what the coalition did, they didn't have anything. They were actually pulling, funding to reduce emissions. So, what's your alternative?
Now, for all of those who have not heard him before, you will understand why we're so excited to have Robert Bryce in our country. As I say, one of the clearest voices speaking facts in what is really a litany of lies told to us around the world by the political classes. But you might not know Mia Schlicht, who works for the IPA, and you've already been introduced, Adam, so I'll introduce Mia. Mia, you've been doing a lot of research in this area at the moment. One of the things that people don't see, we can begin to see some of the costs that are being borne by the prices in our electricity.
And what was that again?
Mia Schlicht, who works for the IPA.
Mia Schlicht, IPA. What's her name? Mia. Was it Institute of Public Affairs? Yeah, there she goes.
PA, and you've already...
Climate change has become about the politics of gesture. And I think that that's perhaps what Labor has done here, is that they see the issue of climate as a part of identity politics, right? Oh, we're climate warriors, we're climate activists, we're climate justice, all these climate fill in the blank. That is one of the ways that the voting public has been seduced by this idea. And how do you disabuse them of it? You pound them with the facts on the cost.
Now, for all of those who have not heard him before, you will understand why we're so excited to have Robert Bryce in our country. As I say, one of the clearest voices speaking facts in what is really a litany of lies told to us around the world by the political classes. But you might not know Mia Schlicht, who works for the IPA, and you've already been introduced, Adam, so I'll introduce Mia. Mia, you've been doing a lot of research in this area at the moment. One of the things that people don't see, we can begin to see some of the costs that are being borne by the prices in our electricity bill. Mm-hmm. But there are also the subsidies. So can you tell us a bit about the research that you've been doing on wind and solar and the subsidies, and where do those subsidies go?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So when it comes to, at the IPA, we had a bit of a sit down and we said, all right, so net zero is ingrained through our legislation, and it'll take a lot of work to take it down. So where can we start? How do we get people to care about this issue? And where you start is the costs. Because there's a lot of people who go out there and they'll say that they support net zero, but then that support immediately is removed when you ask them to pay for it. So we did some surveying at the IPA and we found that less than half of the people that we surveyed were willing to pay a single dollar to prop up net zero policies, and 98% of those people were willing to pay $500 a year. So what we wanted to reveal is, well, if you're consuming electricity and you're paying for electricity, you're actually already propping up these renewable energy infrastructure. So we had a look at the LRET scheme, and basically what this does is it's an artificial market that the government has created to prop up wind and solar infrastructure. And how it works is wind and solar farms, and I'm hesitant to use the word farms because they're not farms, but that's the branding that the left has created. Each year they have to sell a certain number of certificates to energy retailers, and those energy retailers, they don't want to wear those excess costs. They pass that on to consumers. And so what we found was that in 2024 alone, the 50 largest wind and solar farms, they received $1.7 billion in subsidies through people paying their electricity bills. And to make matters worse, of that $1.7 billion, $1.2 billion went to foreign companies.
Yeah, and Adam, when we talk about the cost of this, that is one of the things.
Yeah, let's see what she said
50
again.
largest and 50 largest wind and solar farms, They received $1.7 billion in subsidies through people paying their electricity bills. And to make matters worse, of that $1.7 billion, $1.2 billion went to foreign companies.
Okay, so $1.7 billion was paid, and 70% of those were owned by foreign investors. And then that meant that 1.2 billion was taken out of, yeah, okay. So still, like, so they got like I'm just trying to break this down so it makes sense. So 1.7 billion was paid, 70% of them were foreign owned, and then that meant 1.2. Well, okay, you don't know that because already, like, it's were they all the same size? Did each company take the same amount? Like, maybe there was only a few of them that took a majority of the amount. So, you know, already, like, it'd be nice to sort of see the breakdown. Like, maybe, you know, the top 5 of those 50 companies, you know, were foreign investors, and then they took a majority of it. Like, but you can kind of skew it that way, like, you know, because 50 solar and wind farms, and then saying that 70% of them is like, what if those 70% were like the smallest farms, and they only use like a smaller portion of that 1.7 billion? So I don't actually like how she's broken that down. I mean, she could have, and she's just broken it down so that way it's easy to say. But then loading it with, you know, Australians, you know, paying off their like they're in a cost of living crisis, and electricity prices continue to soar. Like, again, it's actually not. It actually doesn't line up that way. So,
yeah, and Adam, when we talk about
they
the
might
cost
dive
of
into
this,
it
that
more.
is one of the things that has to be sort of baked in, that people have to begin to understand.
Hi, if this is your first time to my channel and you are enjoying my videos, please drop a like and subscribe, and it will help my channel grow.
Have to begin to understand. You talked about a figure of $9 trillion for Australia. Well, McKinsey's has done the research for the world. They're saying $10 trillion a year, every single year, from now and through until 2050. At some point on the pathway to poverty, surely the people will revolt.
Yeah, look, I mean, the problem with these really big figures, and there's, you know, trillions here, trillions there, and there's so many reports. For Australia, it was
Pretty soon you're talking real money. Yeah, that's right.
But I don't think I don't think people really care out there, kind of consuming these figures. They just don't really understand what they mean. And often the industry itself, of course, sells these figures as a benefit. It's like, oh, this is an investment opportunity. So they don't even see it as a cost. They don't realise the opportunity cost. You know, all that money could be spent on something else that's actually productive, that's actually beneficial, rather than this, you know, kind of nonsense wind and solar. But anyway, just in terms of the project I thought, look, it's it's probably worthwhile just to focus on what the federal government here in Australia is spending, and because it had been pretty negligible, frankly, because most of the costs of net zero, they are created by regulations, not actual government spending, and they're foisted on households and businesses in terms of the sorts of energy that they have to provide. But as
Hang on. I'm pretty sure the government is spending more than just putting in regulations to achieve net zero. There's like, you know, they're funding a whole lot more than just generating policies. Like, they're doing like subsidy programs. They're helping, you know, other things like the ACCC in terms of price gouging. That's going to have an effect. You know,
it had been pretty negligible, frankly, because most of the costs of net zero, they are created by regulations, not actual government spending, and they're foisted on households and businesses in terms of the sorts of energy that they have to provide. But as I showed in that paper, I was actually shocked when I looked through all the budget papers, just the quantum and the number of programs too, not just the financial value, had just exploded since 2022, from that 1.7 billion a year to 9 billion. And, you know, they might say that's not a lot, but as I pointed out, you know, it's equivalent to what we spend on our Air Force every year. And so we have.
Yeah, and he didn't just say that we spend the same amount. He didn't just say we spend the same amount on this than defense.
You know, they might say that's Force every year.
Okay, all right, whoa. So he's saying it went from like 1.7 billion to 9 billion, right? Okay, for starters, the reason why it's gone up so much is because the coalition before Labor got in, they cut heaps of spending regarding anything to do with like climate change and approach for net zero. Okay, if you look back through the previous years of the coalition, they cut funding to things like CCS and stuff like that, like the carbon consumption, whatever, like to basically help monitor carbon emissions or CO2 emissions. So like, if you look, like, so of course they're gonna put back up their annual spending, and it's $9 billion, right? And you can't compare how much we spend on defense with climate, because it's not. I don't know why he's saying it's the same we spend on Air Force or defense. Like, it's so much larger.
And so we have the current situation where the Labor government says we can't afford more on defence, we can't afford this, can't afford that. Well, there's $9 billion going to these hundreds of very confusing and overlapping projects. So I thought that was,
what do you mean?
Interesting to draw attention to that.
Okay, I should say to the panel, jump in at any time. The more I talk, the less successful this actually is. So treat it as a dinner party conversation with a very informed audience.
Well, since you said that, so the estimate of 9 trillion, 8 trillion, we had a meeting yesterday, and I just whipped out my calculator. So call it 8 trillion, and you have 27 million Aussies. That's $300,000 per Australian.
Wait,
and that's a number that.
Where's he getting the trillion from? Wait, what the fuck? This
we
is
had a meeting
bonkers.
yesterday, and I just whipped out my calculator. So call it 8 trillion, and you have 27 million Aussies. That's $300,000 per Australian. And that's a number that I think you can deploy and put it on a bumper sticker. I mean, this is a number you need to use in the fight. But I also wanted to just disagree with Adam just a little bit about the press not covering this. So on Friday, we'll be here 2 weeks. We're leaving 2 weeks. So this is a week ago Monday in the Adelaide Advertiser, power price ripoff in South Australia, talking about the fact that solar at certain times is free, and yet consumers are paying higher prices. Here's in the Australian, when was this? June 10th. High price hydrogen bombshell, right? So I think, and here's, this was a good one. This was just last Friday. Criminal linked firms on nation's biggest wind farm. 13% of this is in the Financial Review, the AFR.
See, like, the thing I don't get about this is, like, they're going to rip on all of that, but yet they're not providing any sort of clarity around, like, what it should be. Like, I feel like a lot of this whole, like, we're going to cover it all, but, like, I feel like a lot of this is just going to be about, why, like, no, that it's wrong, but it's not going to say why it's wrong or what it should be or how did it get this wrong. I feel like this is going to be very, very frustrating.
Last Friday, 13% of Victoria's gas budget gone in 3 days. So, in many ways, I think your press is, in fact, covering this as a newspaper guy. I look at this and I think, hell yeah, they're covering it. But why? I guess my question: why aren't these kinds of things resonating with the policymakers?
Well, I think a massive issue that we have here in Australia is, and this came out in the most recent federal election, is mainstream.
By the way, it is covered. That's the whole thing with, like, renewable energies, trying to, be rolled out across Australia. That's why there is subsidies. Like, there is an issue with energy prices, yes, but it is covered heaps, and I believe that the Labor government is actually doing something about it. It may not be directly, like, I don't think you're going to get energy prices down per se, but I think there is going to be introduced more ways of being regulated. And if the stuff with the ACCC does go ahead with groceries, for example, it could flow on effect to energy prices too. But yeah, I don't agree with what you said there.
Australians haven't been afforded the opportunity to actually debate this yet. We have bipartisan support for net zero, and that's meant that, and this happened in the 2022 election, the 2025 election, we haven't got out the nuts and bolts. But when you do start pulling it apart, that's where it falls apart. I think it's interesting.
Okay, I disagree with this because the problem has been is that, like, you know, back in 2008 or with Rudd and Gillard, they started to introduce policies and make a big fuss about the net zero approach and in reducing emissions. And then once the coalition got into power, they basically started pulling it all apart. And then we've only just gone back to Labor in 2022, and then they've reintroduced all of those policies again. So, you know, we kind of started, but then it all got basically ripped to shreds. And then you can see with the coalition, like Abbott pulled funding for ACCC, and then all of our emissions went back up. And then in 2022, it got reintroduced, and it went from something like 400 million megatons of CO2 now down to, like, you know, whatever it is now, like 3. Okay, so it's already cut down heaps, and you know it's being done, but it's still quite new. But the actual rollout of reducing emissions is actually taking effect.
Interesting to note that in the 2025 election, Labor did not mention any of their renewables plan. Chris Bowen was in witness protection. They kept him separate because they know that when you wheel him out, when you bring this stuff into the public domain, it falls apart.
Yeah, just like in the budget.
Anyway, like, your whole argument there about, like, bringing Chris Bowen out, that there is no other alternative. And if you look at what the coalition did, they didn't have anything. They were actually pulling, you know, funding to reduce emissions. So what's your alternative there?
The budget graph I showed exactly the same. All those terms dropped off in the most recent budget, because I think they're starting to realise this is not popular stuff, or it's not going to be.
Robert, I like the way that at some point it was like the Southern Baptist Church. You were getting this call and response going. You know.
Oh yeah.
You'll understand.
Can I have an amen?
And you can say, who is responsible for the disaster of Australia's energy policy in Australia at the moment? They will say. But it is actually a joint responsibility, because all of the states are on a unity ticket. In fact, one of the worst people that we had in Australia was a guy called Matt Keane, who worked for the Liberal Party. Yes. So just keep a few of these names handy.
Why didn't I know his name when I was talking? That's good.
In fact, one of the worst people that we had in Australia was a guy called Matt Keane, who worked for the Liberal Party. Yes. Just keep a few of these names handy.
Why didn't I know his name when I was talking? That's good.
The Australian audience. But speaking of you as an evangelist, this is the difference. I think what Adam is saying is people are not connecting the dots in the way that you do. Not here, not very many. So what will happen is there will always be an excuse for wind and solar.
Yeah.
When wind and solar isn't generating,
and
there's a problem with prices,
he hasn't even said anything yet.
Everything else that is generating. If the lights go out, and soon enough they will, when a big coal-fired generator drops off the grid because wind and solar was resting on its shovels, Chris Bowen will come out and say, "See, these old things are unreliable."
Oh, he said this. It was in the newspaper just yesterday. That he gave it. It was in.
Yeah, well, the Victorian Lawn Power Station had.
Yeah, right. He spoke today, right? But that was part of it. That the reason the power prices are going up is because of old coal plants. Okay, let's see. For decades, you ran coal plants and your power was cheap, and now you're shutting them down and your power is dear. Oh, gee, but it's the coal plant's fault, right? Yeah. But I think there's something else at work here, and I
don't think it's that simple. Like, yeah, you can make that very, very simple analysis, but I'm sure there's a lot of things going into play instead of just like, oh, okay, we're going from, you know, like it's not a 1-for-1. It's a whole transition. It's not even, you know, it's not like, oh yeah, on Monday to Fridays we're going to use coal, then Saturdays to Sundays we're going to use wind and solar, or, you know, whatever, and then Saturday Sunday is more expensive, therefore it's X. You know, that it doesn't work like that. I think there's a lot of things going into play when it comes to energy prices than just as how simple he's saying it.
I think it's important, and I think, you know, Mia, I think, has, you know, seen this. There is this idea around the sanctification of wind and solar as the goal. Mm-hmm. That there is an idea that because they are renewable, they are good, right? But as my friend Jesse Ausubel has said many times, he said, wind and solar may be renewable, but they are not green. And I think that's a really key point. And that what Labor has done, and I think in the US we've seen this, in the Greens in Germany to some extent, that, and I've mentioned this before, but There's a very good article about Greta Thunberg recently in the National Review, and the writer talked about, how she's abandoned it now and she's all about Hamas, and I don't know, it's crazy. But he said that climate change has become about the politics of gesture. And I thought that that's a really keen insight into why it's politically appealing. And I think that that's perhaps what Labor has done here, is that they see the issue of climate as a part of identity politics, right? Oh, we're climate warriors.
No, because I'll give him credit because he has he's from the US and he's just come in, but this has been something that just hasn't been something fun to talk about in the recent years. This is going back a couple of decades now, when Labor tried to introduce some movement towards the net zero and reducing greenhouse gases. So it's not just a nice thing to talk about, and it even goes beyond that. You even look at the Torres. What was it didn't they try and sue the government, the Torres Strait Islanders? It's a very, very recent case where they basically tried to sue the government for the past, funny enough, mostly all Liberal coalition governments, regarding breaching environmental rights, and because their land is basically being impacted. So, it's going beyond just a political talking point, because now there are people that are okay, well, we need to do something about the damage that is being done to the environment because of the negligence by the government. So it's more, and even with all the floodings and that, it's not just a fun topic to talk about, because we are actually seeing a lot of damage done due to climate change.
Warriors were climate, activists were climate, were for climate justice, all these climate fill in the blank. That is one of the ways that the voting public has been seduced by this idea. And how do you disabuse them of it? You pound them with the facts on the cost.
One of the other things that's happened too is that we have fed our young a diet of climate catastrophism, always painting the worst case scenario of things. And I'm very interested in this from you, because...
Okay, it's not just forcing it down their throats. Have you seen how much stuff has been going on for the past year? We've had, heaps of stuff happening in Queensland regarding floods, wind. There was almost the cyclone Alfred, up north, towards Gympie and stuff like that. There's heaps of floodings. Go down south to Lismore. There's been so many floodings. Had that huge flooding in New South Wales. It's not it's becoming super, super apparent. Even all the blue algae crap that's going on in SA at the moment, all the fish dying, and this isn't, even if you go to the West Coast, it's stuffing up the marine life, all the whale sharks and that are and the Ningaloo Reef, they're behaving differently. So it's we don't even have to shove it down their throat. It's it is happening, and it's so obvious if you just sort of pay attention.
You represent this generation, and look, they've essentially replaced, it seems to me, the old gods with a new one. Everyone wants to do something about the environment. Everyone would want to do their bit. How do we get through a message to young women in particular that the world is not about to end?
Well, yeah, that's exactly...
It's not even about it just about to end. It's there are these disasters that are happening more regularly, and they're getting worse, and it's having a lot of issues on getting to work, families, houses, investments, all of these things. It's not about it. It's not. No one's saying the world's going to end. It's just all of these things are just having such an impact on our lives, and it just seems we've got one side that are okay, we're going to go, net zero and try to fight this, and you got the other one that's oh no, it's not even real. Just go back and just keep to your everyday life. But you can't look at it like that. It's so polar opposite.
Right, and a bit of background about me is I studied science and law, and I majored in climate science. So I've heard it all. I've seen all the data. I've heard it all, and that's brought me here, so that'll tell you that much about the data. But it's a good point, and it's an important point, especially with young people, is we are constantly told this message that there is no cost too high when it comes to saving the environment. Because if we don't do something about it, the world will explode into a giant ball of flame tomorrow. And that's what our young people are told, and they're taught all through school, they're taught all through university. And it's this message that if you are a good...
Are they? Are they actually told that if you don't pay attention to climate change, the Earth is going to explode and it's going to be this catastrophic event? Surely they're not being told that. I'm sure that they're looking outside and it's flooding and they're like, oh, why is this happening? Was it like this, a couple of decades ago and blah, blah, blah. And their parents or, whatever are saying, no, actually, it's actually been getting worse over the past, decade. I'm sure that's probably more realistic than, this whole, Earth exploding thing.
Person, you need to be doing something for the climate. And it's a fantastic branding exercise, because basically the result of that is no cost is too high. So when we bring out these numbers and we say it's going to cost you X, Y, Z, and they say, well, that's my duty. So this is where the work of the database comes in and why it's so important. So to tackle this moral high ground that these zealots of net zero have, is we've been visiting the communities who are actually affected by the rollout of renewables. And we've been going to regional communities. Peter Credlin has been leading this and has done a fantastic job covering this on her program. But we've been going to these communities and seeing what these companies are doing to them, and the stories are horrendous. There are stories of bullying, blackmail, underhanded tactics. And basically when you bring those stories to light, it shows you cannot feel good about this. When you see what these projects are doing to the heartland of Australia, the communities that prop up our national export market, you no longer can feel good about yourself for supporting renewable energy. And so with this database, the goal is to show these communities that they are not alone. Often what these companies will do is they'll share this message that, there's a bit of opposition, but it's sparse, it's small, it's minimal. We want to collect that data.
I think what she is touching on is 100%, true. There are locations where they are rolling out these, wind farms and stuff like that, and they are having an effect on the communities and stuff like that too. So, yeah, I do think that there needs to be a side that basically takes them into consideration and a way to basically compensate communities and things like that, and have like an actual conversation instead of just rolling it out and letting them deal with whatever. But at the end of the day, there is a overarching direction that all of this is going, and it just needs to be really, really carefully rolled out. That's for sure. So I think she is touching on something quite important here.
Play it clearly and show that no, it's not. It's national, it's organised, and it is growing. And if you continue to push these policies, you will have a wall of communities banding together and fighting right back.
Right. And if I can add to that, because I've interviewed, hundreds of people in rural America and rural parts of Europe and Asia as well. What is key for them is to know they're not alone. And
I'd like to expand on, just to reiterate, and that's completely true. I think in this broadly post-Christian society, you're just realising that there is a desire for a religion which is inbuilt into humans.
Yeah,
and
this God-shaped hole in the heart.
It's just there. We want something. We want some set of rules, something to live by, even though it is irrational. And I hate to go back to COVID, but it's my bugbear. But we saw the same religious fanaticism with the COVID rules. And note the word zero as well. COVID zero, net zero.
Yeah.
That is a fanatical
zero
number.
Is an emotional number.
It's an emotional number. It's like eradication.
Coke
eradication.
Zero. Yeah.
And to eradicate.
Well, but at the end of the day, it's not going to sound as good. It's like, okay, we're going to go for a net 2% by net 2% emissions by 2050. Of course, it's going to be zero, because the goal is to basically emit no greenhouse gases. I don't understand, what the problem is there.
That's Coke Zero.
It's occurred to me. I didn't thought of it before, but Coke Zero,
Coke Zero.
You can have all the soda you want at no cost.
No, but still, it's exactly the same. And I do hope net zero goes the same way intellectually as COVID Zero did and has done.
Well, as Donald Trump said, I've never seen anyone thin drinking that Coke Zero.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So that's a mirage too. It's a mirage too. But anyway,
Adam, I want to actually take you on a little bit further on this note, though, because despite what people think about Australia, it is in fact one of the most urbanised countries on earth. Adam, is the problem with us is that we are so disconnected from our sources of our wealth, our sources of energy and our sources of our food that we are now actively voting against them.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. And just having spent 4 years in the US, you realise there is a very large rural community there as a proportion of the population, and that is a counterweight to the urban elites very much.
Yeah.
We don't have that here. I mean, despite the reputation that we have overseas, which has of course been completely undermined by COVID as the, larrikins and kind of irreverent tough guys, that's been shown to be, far from the truth. We are extremely urbanised, more than the Netherlands, I think, actually. If you look at the correct definition, you're certainly more than England, much more urbanised than England.
But isn't that national identity? I mean, in Australia, still about that kind of rural farmer and the cattle stations.
Tiny,
and
but if you actually look at the numbers,
but
that's the image. But if you look at the
Crocodile
numbers,
Dundee
really
and all those
tiny,
guys.
and this is why I kind of worry about Australia's future.
That's like the
because we are on this unusual
stereotypical Australian perception overseas. It's actually quite funny. If you ever go overseas, you'll find out that, in some places they actually do think that.
case of extremely wealthy 5 or 6 cities, basically, and that's the whole population. And they're going to vote left. Well, I think too much for their own good until they realise it's too late. Whereas at least in Europe and in America, you've got these large regional areas which tend to be quite conservative, and they do not like.
Well, and I think that's a key point about the urban dwellers don't have to put up with the batteries or the high voltage transmission or the solar projects or the wind projects. They aren't farms, by the way. No, I was lectured many years ago in Canada as a Canadian woman. Don't you dare call them farms. They're projects, she said.
Well, even the term renewables. They're not.
It's a terrible term, isn't it?
They're not renewables, and we need to switch that language. Robert's done a good job with this.
Great.
Yeah,
That's
Robert's
great.
switched to using alternative energy, and we need to start doing that here. That's a longer discussion, but that's just the branding around this. They've done a fantastic job at that. But on that point about,
I don't know if they're like trying to imply that the left has actually defined it as renewable. I mean, I don't know who even came to defining it as renewable. I mean, you could use alternative. But the whole point of renewable is that it's is meant to be something that can be charged, I guess, instead of a process of basically recharging. Whereas coal and that is basically a refined process. So yeah, you can call it branding and all that sort of stuff. But I just don't think the topic is around the branding. Like if they change it to alternative energy, like it's just going to have this whole new feel about everything. Like I think it's not the.
how do you make the inner city people care about it? This is always comes up, and especially with young people. How do you make young people care? Well, the reality is until they start paying their electricity bills and they go through the roof, that's the only point they're going to start caring about this. And it's partly because representation of these regional and rural communities is completely absent. So if you take an example of this, the National Farmers Federation have said very minimal on this issue. And part of the reason for that is the CEO, or the former CEO, has recently been appointed the Energy Infrastructure Commissioner.
Oh, God.
Robert, take us through some of this around the world, because one of the stories that's never spoken about is the big finance which is behind big wind and big solar. And I know you've done a lot of work on that.
Yeah. Well, and Mia as well. I mean, what is it, another 1.7 billion, 1.2 billion
1.2
went to
billion.
foreign corporations. And this is what I
I don't think you can look at like a subsidy or anything like that and being like, oh, that money went to them, like as if it's like they still had to fork up the cost at the front anyway, and like the subsidy doesn't. I don't think it actually works like that. Like it's because they're obviously putting up the upfront costs, and then they're taking the risk as well. Like that's the whole thing, is that they're taking a risk and they're providing a service through that subsidy too. So you can't look at it as they received a subsidy for however much money. They get that money back. No, because they're actually wearing risk as well.
see. Well, I talked about Osage County, Oklahoma. Well, this is an Italian company coming into rural Oklahoma. Why? They're after the tax credits. I mean, this is very simple. And, it's the old rule in politics, follow the money. Cui bono, who benefits? So, particularly in the U.S., where as I've followed this, and I've, tracked hundreds of cases now, the most aggressive of these climate change carpetbaggers, because that's what they are, pushing these wind and solar projects in rural America, they're foreign corporations. They're not domestic. So Shell, Invenergy, which is controlled by a Canadian company, Electricité de France, Electricité de Portugal. These companies have been rapacious in their fight and trying to intimidate rural communities to force them to take wind and solar projects they don't want. So, after reporting on this for many years now, I don't think it's a cynical view, although I'm okay with cynicism. As the great Lily Tomlin said, no matter how cynical I get, I can't keep up. This push for alt energy is not about climate change, it's about money and who benefits. The rural Australians, rural Americans, rural people suffer. They take the hit with their property values, view sheds, tourism, et cetera. Who benefits? Big banks, big law firms, big business, and big NGOs.
And big environment.
Big NGOs. I don't call them environmental groups either. Yeah. They're NGOs.
But why is...
See, out of everything that's been said so far in this whole 20-minute, interview, meeting, or conference or whatever, still no one has actually put forward anything that is, remotely better or, some sort of alternative. The only thing that they've spoken about is an alternative name for renewables. Like, it's ridiculous how you can sit there for 20 minutes and just stomp on everything that the current government's doing, but then just have no sort of alternative. Like this chick here, she's talking about like $1.7 billion went into wind and solar, and then 70% of them were foreign investors. So therefore, we're giving 1.2 billion to foreign investors that are developing, solar and wind farms. Like, it's okay. What would you prefer? If you were to not provide those subsidies to those foreign investors, does that mean that you need to invest 500 million? Like, do they just go away, or like do they just pay for whatever their subsidies, like the difference in their subsidies? Like, no alternative plan has actually been discussed here. It's just stomping on whatever currently is going on. And if you actually look at what's going on, it is actually progressing. We are reducing emissions, and we are on an approach. Might not be what we intentionally wanted for 2030, and it's not meeting exactly that's in the Paris commitment and whatever. But at least it's doing something better than what the last decade under the coalition's done.
Greenpeace and the Wilderness Society silent about land clearing on the Great Dividing Range. Why is that the case? And I keep saying this to people, try this as a mental exercise. You take the teal candidates, which were funded by essentially big wind and big solar. So they're funded by power groups, right? And you turn them into the Santos candidates, no one would vote for them.
Yeah.
If you drew a direct line between, hang on, there's a very big energy company which is pushing these people who are pushing my profit line in what they're doing, well, they now exist in our politics, and they're seen as the virtuous ones, which I find bewildering, and young people are voting for them now.
Well, yeah, it's a branding exercise, and they've done a fantastic job at it. And until you start picking apart every single element where this falls down, whether it's the costs, the harm to the environment, or even the damage to our national security, that's a huge element of this. So
I don't understand. You haven't picked apart. You haven't said anything yet that has picked it apart. You keep saying that, but like nothing's actually been said yet.
Even just breaking down the fact that we dig up all this coal, we then export it to China. China then uses this coal to
build solar panels,
to power their energy system, to build our solar panels and our wind turbines, which we then buy off them to bring here, and then to create our power system. And we could have just used the coal in the first place. Like, it doesn't.
No, okay, all right. I mean, that's just exactly, you just explained like what a supply chain is. It's just, we're buying, we mine the minerals, and then we send it to China, then they assemble it, they do the refining, they do the assembly, they do all those processes and then sell it back to us. So we basically have to buy all the work that they do to them. Okay, if you're going to say we're not doing anything regarding basically doing that ourselves, we actually are. There are huge incentives for companies in Australia to start, working towards developing and building our own solar panels and things like that, and like batteries, different types of solutions to use in batteries. Yes, we mine the most amount, but then we have to offshore the design and development of them and then buy the products back. That is fine. And I don't think you can sit here and say that we're not doing anything about it when the current government is. They're providing incentives for people to do that. And also state governments are doing that too, all throughout, I think, WA, Queensland and New South Wales. Like, we're trying to bring that type of manufacturing and design and development back into Australia. And it is progressing. So I don't know why she's saying that
It doesn't
here.
make any sense, but young people aren't told this. It's not broken down, and we've got to start there.
So how do we break
Just to slightly extend that, just in terms of there's a perception that big fossil fuel companies are the evil ones pro fossil fuels. But my sense is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you have BP being beyond petroleum, and they try to advertise their green credentials, their various green credentials. Well, I think they quite like this kind of green net zero stuff because it doesn't massively restrict the supply of fossil fuels, and so the prices go through the roof, and so they encourage it.
It's an interesting thought, but I don't
have empirical evidence, but that's just what I think is going.
Well, two thoughts coming.
Yeah, so we've got the National Battery Strategy, which is $500 million for value chain for lithium mining. I mean, Australia is like the leading lithium ion miner in the world, so we 100% have the materials and ready to go. The National Reconstruction Fund, NRF, has 15 billion total that's invested, which is 1 billion for manufacturing and 1.5 billion for renewables, and they support battery, solar, and inverter supply chain development. Critical mining strategies for 2023 to 2030. So again, that's investing more into the mining, and they're trying to partner with non-supply chains, non-China supply chains, to basically diversify instead of making China such a monopoly in terms of that solar panel manufacturing and battery manufacturing. The solar manufacturing, they're trying to build this back up. I believe the Liberal or the coalition tried to stop this previously. So the state initiatives, like I said, WA, Queensland, they're all investing in companies that want to look into developing batteries and different types of chemicals for that too. And obviously there's more trade strategies and that to drive down costs. So there's so much that the government is trying to do currently to trying to fill in that gap of the supply chain. So if you drive the messaging that we're not doing anything, of course that's going to be in their minds, and we're going to lose all this progress that we're already investing in. So I just don't believe it.
One is this idea about sin and the devil, right? And the demonization of big oil has been ongoing, right? In the U.S., we have ongoing lawsuits against the big oil and gas companies because of climate change, right? That individual, like counties, I think in Multnomah County, Oregon, is suing, a number of oil companies for climate change, right? So this demonization of the oil and gas industry in particular has been one of these ways to identify the enemy, right? And the evildoer, right? In this kind of Christian tradition. But in terms of seeing this, where the positive trends are, what has happened in the U.S. now, some of this is due to Trump, of course, but some of it is due to higher interest rates and the bad economics of offshore wind. You see BP dumping wind. You see Equinor dumping wind. You see Shell dumping offshore wind. So they're starting to sober up as well because their shareholders are saying, why are you dilly-dallying with all this junk? You're an oil and gas company. You make more money doing oil and gas than you do this alternative energy. So I do see a change that's very positive.
But that's not the point. The point isn't to try and drive profit margins and all that. Of course, like investors and shareholders are going to want the best return. But the thing is that we're trying to move towards net zero. And that's the goal. Okay, there might need to be a shed in profits. There might need to be a shed in a different way of thinking, especially in the early stages. No transition is ever going to be as smooth as something so important as energy. So I don't think sticking towards, how do we get the best amount of money? It's also like what impact you are having. So
That's being driven primarily by shareholders saying, we bought your shares, we want a return on our investment.
Yeah. See,
Do you see that?
Yeah, so they're going to have shareholders are going to have a huge influence on obviously a lot of the funding and stock price and that for the company. So it's gonna be a huge shift. And that's why it's gonna be more of a transition out instead of just a complete one day it's this and the next day it's that.
That young Australians can be reached in this debate. They have been fed for.
Wait, wasn't there? I think it might still be going on. Isn't there a shareholder from Santos that is possibly suing them regarding greenwashing? Let's so hang on, let's have a look at this. So Santos calls alleged greenwashing case as biased retelling of its net zero aspirations. So, who called on? Company closing arguments. Lemma, which was first challenge. Santos misled investors by positioning itself as clean fuel companies. So you have investors here that are investing into Santos because they claim to be positioning itself as clean fuels, as a clean fuels company, and clear and credible pathway to net zero emissions. So there are investors that are going to be going for the best return, and there's also going to be investors that are being pressured to go towards this net zero emissions as well, because if the government wants that direction, then that's where the money is going to go. So we've got these investors that are investing in Santos and stuff like that, saying, okay, yeah, they're a clean fuel company, and then finding out that they're actually dodging the books and they're actually not as clean as what they're claiming to be, and they might be trying to do some offsetting Santos Climate to reduce emissions by 26% to 30%. It's not a representative statement of present intention, not a promise or prediction. So, it's going to be interesting that the shift in not only the way that companies have to operate, but it's also the investors' mindset that's also going to be changing. Not all investors are going to be, well, from this sort of what's come out here, obviously there are investors that are trying to go towards the net zero aspirations as well, not just I'm going to try, get as much money. So I think that's just sort of goes against what he said there. But whatever percentage of people or investors are, it's like that. There probably are still a majority like that. But the mindset is shifting, and that's the whole point of all of these initiatives. Is we're changing our mindset around a lot of it.
Such a long time, such a essentially a diet of doom, and that this is the thing that gets me about this debate is that climate change is a problem. It's not an existential problem. Net zero is a target. It's not even a policy, but we're talking about a policy response to a problem. We need to start essentially.
Yeah.
Such a long time, such a essentially a diet of doom, and that this is the thing that gets me about this debate is that climate change is a problem. It's not an existential problem. Net zero is a target. It's not even a policy, but we're talking about a policy response to a problem. We need to start separating these things. And how do we go about doing that with a younger audience?
Well, I think to start with we actually need to start having a debate, and our political leaders need to step up, because right now there is no debate. There is no.
Okay. I'm pretty sure, what is his name? Ted Bryan, O'Brien and Chris Bowen debate. Boom. 10th of April, 2025, Chris Bowen and Ted O'Brien have a debate on climate. There is a debate. It is happening. So I don't know what she's on about.
No political party willing to get out there and say, let's withdraw from net zero. Let's start there. And that's how you'll open up the conversation with young people. Young people aren't stupid. They'll listen to politics. There's this idea that young people aren't engaged in. There is no debate. There is no political party willing to get out there and say, let's withdraw from net zero. Let's start there. And that's how you'll open up the conversation with young people. Young people aren't stupid. They'll listen to politics. There's this idea that young.
I can't understand. Is she saying that we need to someone needs to come out and say, let's remove net zero in order to spark the debate. Because who's going to say that? Like, is she anti-net zero? I can't.
People aren't engaged in politics. They are. But when your political leaders aren't willing to step up and have that debate, how do you expect young people to follow?
Yeah, if you don't have...
What?
Just in the last few...
You've got your energy Minister of Energy and whatever. Like, yeah. Look, this was only a few months ago. They had a debate for an hour. Like, and they have these. There's heaps of people talking about it. It's on this program here, so.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, no, sorry.
Just in the last minute or so, Robert, because tell us about what's happening in the rest of the world, because in fact, energy consumption in the United States was pretty flat for quite a long period of time.
Yeah.
Then along comes the data centre. So tell us about what's happening with energy consumption in the United States, and if we want to be part of the AI revolution, what will be needed?
I'm not going to watch rest.
Well, first, it was just 2 days ago, was an
All right, so I don't know. Oh, well, didn't really get much from that. It just, they actually didn't even talk about, you know, the policies themselves. They actually didn't talk about the plan. Like, there was so much missing from that. Yeah, like I don't even know where to begin, because there's some key issues that weren't covered there in terms of the approach for net zero. Like, I think the best sort of things that were tackled there was when this Mia lady, she mentioned about the communities in the rural areas are heavily impacted, which is true. Like, it's been covered, and I think that is a very, very good point, and something that does need a lot more attention, and we need to make sure we're paying attention to how the rollout of these types of projects are affecting those communities 100%. But I think the overall sort of discussion didn't really cover that much. It didn't have any good points. The thing here where is she?
50 largest wind and solar farms, they received $1.7 billion in subsidies through people paying their electricity bills. And to make matters worse, of that $1.7 billion, $1.2 billion went to foreign companies.
See, like what she's mentioning there, like the 1.2 going to when you look at that 1.7, this I wish they dug into this, but like that 1.7, how many of those 50 companies contributed overall to that 1.7? Because was it like 5 companies? Was it 10 companies? Was it 20 companies? You don't even know if like the top 10, most paying companies in that 1.7 billion, even were foreign companies. So, like, that was probably the only time that any sort of maths or data or anything actually got brought up. Everything else was just, it didn't even touch on anything. It was all just, yeah, it's a bit of a waste of time. Okay. That just annoyed me. It'd be nice if they actually spoke about the actual, policies and targets that they're actually, going to be looking into. I just think it's, yeah. I mean, the thing I thought they were going to touch on to the most was the fact that, there's only been like 1.5% reduction. Well, I think it's saying like we're meant to be meeting 3% reduction per year, but we're only meeting like 1.5% or 0.5% per year. So like we have this target to hit by like was it like 59% reduction in emissions by 2030, and I think we're now only going to be targeting for 43% because we can't hit it. I thought they should have targeted that a bit more, but oh well. Yeah, there's huge policy introductions with like the previously energy or emissions only had to be logged, or like a report had to be given by non-private companies. So basically all government agencies had to declare what their emission footprint was. And for like 2022, 23, and part of 24, they had to basically provide that data, and they had to show that they were reducing their emissions. And the thing is that most of the emissions in Australia are done through energy companies and stuff like that. So what the current government is now doing is making it mandatory for all of those companies to now basically release what their emission stats are. And they're going to be investing into auditing those companies, and it's going to be a lot more regulated. So these are things to basically help the overall reduction of emissions that the current government is doing. But that was never sort of mentioned. They just basically were just trying to stomp on wind farms and stuff like that. So, and the branding behind net zero. So it's like this wasn't even a productive conversation. I think it starts, but yeah, you want more debate on it. Well, you're gonna have to have something to debate instead of just how it's named. Hi, if this is your first time to my channel and you are enjoying my videos, please drop a like and subscribe, and it will help my channel grow.